There we go. Sorry about that. So what I want to talk to you about, this webinar, we first started talking about this, I think in December or January before COVID. And so I'm going to tell you this webinar is in two parts. It's probably what I would have told you 3 months ago, and then how things clearly have changed, how I think they probably will change because of COVID-19. So there are a variety of ways to find funding for your company. I'm assuming that the vast majority of you have biotech type companies, although I think these approaches to different methods of funding are applicable in various ways for any type of company. But there are four major ways to fund a biotech company. One would be organic sales. It's selling what you make as you go along. The second is equity investments from angels or venture capital, or finding funding from federal grants and contracts, and in particular the SBIR and STTR awards, or finally corporate partnerships. Each of those somewhat different, and what we'll talk about is how to find funding that matches your company's strengths. And then I want to talk about how things have changed because of COVID-19, different things based on what we saw in 2007, 8, 9, as well as what we're seeing today. All right. So the first thing I want to tell you is that you will need a lot of time and money to fund your biotech company, no matter what type of product really that you're undertaking to try to provide. Whether it's the new drug, where the best estimates are $2.5 billion to bring your drug from the bench to the market in optimistically 10 to 15 years. For medical devices, it's not much better. You'll need tens of millions, probably hundreds of millions of dollars, depending on what class of device you have, to take it through from the bench and creating that product to FDA clearance or FDA approval. So organic growth is most common when you're dealing with not FDA products, right? Research tools that you can sell to folks in academia or in the research industry, but on the research side, or if you're producing IT products and services. Sometimes you can afford to prove your customer, create your product, prove your customer, prove the margins that you believe you can get as you go, sell as you go. Doing that allows you to retain ownership of the company. It's only appropriate for certain types of products or if you're providing services. No matter what, the danger in this approach is that your growth may be slowed by a lack of capital. That is, you've got a real chicken and egg problem. How are you going to pay other people if you don't yet have sales? How are you going to make those products, right? How are you going to create enough inventory to actually sell them? And finally, how are you going to pay other people if you don't yet have sales, right? So your growth may be limited. Another type of method, equity investments, that's where you trade ownership of your company, that's the equity part, for cash that investors have. This is an investment. You are trying to convince others that you are a good investment. You've got to have good sales skills and in fact, have a good plan. So there are two basic categories of equity investors: venture capital or angel investors. Don't mix those up, they're quite separate. Venture capital is where a firm gathers money into a fund. The money comes from individuals, wealthy individuals, or from financial institutions. There is a prospectus that defines the bounds of those investments, and the investors cannot go outside those bounds. The prospectus may describe what stage the company is at, early stage or late stage, may describe what industry they're in, medical devices versus pharma, for example, or it may be broader. But the individuals who are putting money into the fund want to know how their money is going to be invested, and the prospectus will define that. The fund will have a beginning and an end. It's typically a 10-year term, with the first 5 years typically for active investments in new portfolio companies. The firm makes decisions as to how the fund will be invested. In contrast to that are angel investors. These are individual investors, they're accredited investors, but they make individual investment decisions. So when you go to a group like the Tech Coast Angels, that is a collection of individuals who are working together to provide some efficiency in their due diligence processes. But it is still really important to understand you have to convince individuals one by one to make investments in your company. Probably it's 6 to 18 months between the time you first start considering equity investment and the time that you actually receive such an investment. All right, because I want to keep going through the different modes of funding, and thank you for doing this, Sam. I don't know, and I apologize to everybody. But federal funding, SBIR and STTR awards, although small businesses are eligible for many other types of federal funding mechanisms, but SBIR and STTR are set aside for only small businesses. So you're competing against other small businesses. Although the Small Business Administration really sponsors the SBIR and STTR, 11 federal agencies administer these grants and contracts, and each agency runs the program slightly differently. The funding is competitive. You write proposals, and there's a technical review. It's primarily technical review of your proposal. The funding levels are typically 10 to 20%, meaning if 100 proposals come in, 10 to 20 of them are funded. And that's for phase 1 awards. For phase 2 awards, the percentage is quite a bit higher. And in fact, this phase 1, phase 2 funding is given in phases. Phase 1 is typically R&D for technical proof of concept, typically 100 to 400K for a 6 to 9 month project to prove that technical proof of concept. Phase 2 then is to get to a commercialization ready product. The phase 2 awards being much more money, usually in the neighborhood of $1 million to $2 million for a 2-year project. It's typically 3 to 5 months, depending on the agency, between the time you submit and the time that it's cleared that you're likely or unlikely to get funded. And then 6 to 9 months total from the time you applied until you get funding in your accounts. And at the SBDC, we can provide guidance on how to submit these proposals. Next slide. All right, corporate partnerships are something that sometimes small businesses forget about, but they're actually quite important. Bigger companies have cash and they want innovation. That's the basic driver for corporate partnering deals from the big company side. There are many different types of business structures that can be created between two companies depending on the circumstances. And the best thing to do is to figure out what your strengths are and what your potential partner's strengths are and try to maximize the complementarity that you both bring to the table. So the types of relationships can be anything from work for hire, that is the small company maybe is doing some R&D that the big company would like to have done, all the way to producing a product, and then part of the business structure is having royalties on sales of those products. The relationship can be one in which only the small company works on a project, or where both companies work on the project, preferably using their complementary skills. There's typically in these no equity component, that is, you usually are not giving up ownership of the company, and that non-dilutive aspect is very attractive. One of the typical issues or barriers is how to protect each company's IP, and there on both sides will be pre-existing IP that needs to be protected and preserved as being owned by each company. Then ideally there will be IP that's created during the funding period, and the partnership deal structure will need to define what happens to that intellectual property. And a typical rule of thumb is 9 to 12 months to complete the deal, even when all the parties agreed that this would be a good thing to do. Next slide. Just quickly, this graph from E&Y shows the driver for corporate partnerships. Companies, big companies have cash but need innovation. And so this just describes various companies in the pharma space and their varying cash positions and innovation need positions. So a diagram like this is one that you might create for your own situation and the companies that you think you might want to approach. Figure out who actually has the cash to spend and who's most in need of innovation. The next slide. And I will say that successful corporate partnerships actually often lead to M&A activity. So here is just on the y-axis a set of years from 2014 to 2019, showing the M&A activity in various sectors of the life science industry, and showing 2019 was a very good year for M&A. 2020 was expected to be, but likely will not be because of COVID. And the next slide. All right, so with all these options, you know, it's like everything in entrepreneurship. The thing you need to do is figure out what is the best, most efficient strategy for you to get early funding and then later funding so that you can build your company. So here I've got two axes looking at business sophistication on the x-axis, from low business sophistication, maybe technically high sophistication, but business-wise, it's relatively low, to high business sophistication. That's the x-axis. And then the y-axis, technical innovation, from low technical innovation to high technical innovation, all right? So companies, good companies, can probably exist in any of these quadrants except the lower left, right? So you can have low technology, but if you have high business sophistication, you may be able to recognize a terrific business opportunity and make a lot of money. On the business sophistication, all of these are relatively complex axes, but business sophistication, I want to point out, is many different things. How to get the product to market, how you're going to make money, knowing your customers and how to reach them, knowing how to create your product and make it at scale, right? So somehow you've got to create a team ultimately that has all of those, all of that type of knowledge. right? But what you want to do is assess where you are on this graph, and then get funding to build your company so that you can access more types of funding. So let's just go through. I just tried to, on the next slide, just tried to use this axis to ask, you know, what type of company are you, and what type of funding matches that company that you may be right now. So for grants are a situation where you can, if you have high technology innovation, but low business sophistication, you can still get funding, especially for NSF and NIH. DOD wants you to have a little bit more business sophistication, because at the end of DOD, they typically want products that you've created. On the next slide, so in those situations, you would be using that funding to build the expertise in your company so that you could access more types of funding. And frequently people say, you know, the SBIR awards become sort of good housekeeping seals of approval for investors who can look at that, and equity investors often love technology innovation, but they really want you to have enough business experience and sophistication that you can tell them how and why you're going to make money and how much money you're going to make, right? So this is a case where, for example, a seed portfolio company that gets early stage funding may have really high technical innovation, but they sure as heck better improve their business sophistication if they want to get equity investors to give them more money in the later stages. So from a seed portfolio company, you really want to improve your business sophistication, even if it's at the expense of sacrificing some of the tech innovation and essentially de-risking that tech innovation. So on the next slide, looking at corporate partners, again, corporate partners really want you to have some type of business sophistication. And that's, if nothing else, to help explain to them that you are going to be a reasonable partner, that you know where this product needs to go. Corporate partnerships of low money may have higher technical innovation and lower business sophistication. But once you start talking about big money with corporate partners, you really need to have people on board that know where you're going and how that money should be spent. Okay, and the next slide. Okay, so how have things changed because of COVID? So I don't have a crystal ball either, but we can look at 2008, 2009, and ask what happened then to provide a bit of guidance. So on the next slide, there, first of all, are investor reactions. So how are investors feeling? Well, they're feeling about the same way you and I are if you have any money in the stock market. So this is just, I think it's the last 3 months or so of the stock market going down and then coming back up. It seems like every day it's up or down a percent. So how confident are you feeling right now about your money in the stock market? You're really willing to take a big risk? Probably not, right? And so because of that, and this was shown in 2008, 2009, you should expect investors to be a little bit more conservative. You should expect decreased valuations. And those decreased valuations are likely going to impact the amount of money that you can raise. Anybody who does not go in with decreased valuations either needs to be willing to hear that's the case or expect that the door will be closed. On the next slide, how are companies feeling? Well, companies, in my experience right now, because of COVID, are feeling a bit schizophrenic. There are two types of life science companies, at least those that are involved in COVID-19 making diagnostics, vaccines, tools, and therapeutics. And they are running full bore and absolutely don't have time for anything other than to figure out, what the heck they're doing. If you have something related to COVID-19 or that could be related to COVID-19, you need to put that in your first slide and in your first sentence of your elevator pitch to these companies. Those life science companies that are not involved in COVID-19, they're working from home like the rest of us. And frequently they're trying to figure out whether it's because of the stock market or because their customers have just vanished, how their business is going to be impacted and how they need to react. So they are uninterested, as far as I can tell, in entertaining the thought of future investments in small companies. Next slide. Okay, so they're challenging corporate markets. All of that is pretty bad news. Decreased valuations, challenging corporate markets, unless you're working on COVID. And if you are, it's almost certainly a pivot. So that's going to be challenging for you. But this is a time when companies succeed. And we saw that in 2008, 2009. There are a number of examples you can see in the tech side that people talk about. So Square and some of the other companies that are quite successful that were founded in 2008, 2009. In the biotech side, Kite was founded in 2009, certainly found a way to succeed over the past 8 years and ultimately be acquired by Gilead last year. So the things that you need to remember is that cash is king. That's something that should have been first and foremost in your mind anyways, but especially in this time, it's critically important. Money is harder to find and is very, very precious. The lower valuations will imply lower funding amounts in each round. And the thing about cash is king is that although you should always be conserving cash, now your investors may be patient with that. Whereas when cash is a little easier to find, sometimes your investors are pushing you to spend that money faster than you can wisely spend it. You need to focus. So time is on your side. That's the good news, but you do need to focus. You do not have time and money to follow all of your ideas. You need to pick one that's best and push it as far as you can with the money that you have. Knowing where you're going is critically important so you don't waste that money. What do you need for forward progress and how can you accomplish it for the least money possible? Pick the right experiments that give the best cost to benefit ratio. All right. And with that, I wanted to make sure to save enough time for questions from you. So I'll go over to Q&A and we'll see where we go from there.
Thank you so much, Molly. We have our first question from Paul. When trying to get equity investment from angels, showing skin in the game with self-funding and family and friends is important. So if someone's looking for, let's say, $2 million, a seed money, how much of that should be self-funded and friends and family to convince angels?
I think the answer to that is complicated. People will look at a number of different investors, will look at a number of different factors. So if you tell them, I've been a postdoc and I got this really smart idea, nobody's going to expect you to come up with $200K to have skin in the game. It just isn't reasonable, right? They know you don't have it. If you are coming with 10, 15 years experience, and one of the things that you're touting on your team slide is that you and a bunch of the other folks that you've recruited to work with you, have collectively decades of experience in this industry. And the question comes in to what you guys have contributed, and you start talking about sweat equity. Well, that's okay, but that's the time where investors are just looking and saying, look, if you guys don't believe in this, why should I put my money into it? So it's a bit of a balance based on where you are. You certainly want to portray that you've got experience, you know where you're going. But if you're in a situation where you don't have cash in because you bought a house and you got 2 kids and you know all the things that life throws our ways, you should expect that question and just have a good answer, right? Even if it's, I got 2 kids, I can't, right? But having that kind of straight up answer will be helpful. And don't be surprised by it, because you're right, they will ask.
Great, thank you for that. And now there's a question in regards to, is it, matchmaking for startups. Is there like a clearinghouse or an agency that can facilitate matchmaking, for startups and companies as like for partnerships?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a clearinghouse. There certainly are individuals who can help you. And they're typically consultants. They'll be, their sign on their door will say, I'm a business development consultant for, the med tech industry, and they'll show you their expertise in that area. And they certainly can be very valuable, because if you do not have the connections to the industry, having someone on your team who does have those connections, even if it's through a consulting relationship, can be quite valuable.
Great. Now we have a question from Chris. Now, do you have any guidance in regards to, charitable foundations as a source for funding?
Yeah, I like charitable foundations. If you have if you're addressing a disease that has a strong charitable foundation. So the Juvenile Diabetes Foundation, the Cystic Fibrosis Foundations have been unbelievably helpful in bringing new medicines to the market over the past couple of decades. And so they can be very, very powerful. They usually their modus operandi is usually not as an equity investor, although sometimes they will ask for that type of terms. But keep solving the disease state, keep the improvement in the health of those affected is paramount, because that is the thing that's paramount for those organizations.
Now, in the case when an investor is conducting due diligence on a startup, what do you feel is the best way to share the IP, chemical structures, safely? Is it a good idea to hire an independent third-party consulting firm to broker this vetting process?
Oh, I wouldn't do that. I would probably purposely save things that I felt most proprietary about. There's no reason to disclose a chemical structure that you feel very proprietary about as the first piece if they're going to reject you for some other reason, right? So just save it. Don't be secretive about it. Just say that you're going to save that for last. And maybe it's a situation, it probably is a situation where the actual investors don't need to know that structure at all. But the IP attorneys for the investors and the IP attorneys, that's a way that you could essentially have third parties talking about it and giving opinions that will be helpful to the investors.
Great. Now, we always get this question a lot. Could you name some VCs or angels that are players in the Orange County area?
So what was, the question was about VCs and
Or angel
angels, or,
investment, yeah, you know, VCs or angel firms
yeah,
in Orange County.
okay. So the angel part is very easy. And that Tech Coast Angels, Pasadena Angels, there are individual high net worth people who invest as individuals who have not joined the group, either of those groups. But that's probably first places to start. Angels tend to be quite regional. So if we get a company from Texas, let's say, that applies to Tech Coast Angels, we tell them to go back to Texas, find a good angel group there that believes in them, and then approach us if they still need additional funding. For venture capital, there are more and more VC firms that are in the life sciences. Most of them are based in the West LA, Santa Monica type of area as their base, but they are looking all over the place. All over the place, meaning regionally in the LA, Orange County area. And the Beall Applied Innovation has terrific inroads into those groups and people who can help you find those individuals. So I would encourage you, you know, Beall Applied Innovation is not closed. And to the extent you want introductions to venture capital, you think you're ready, the first steps would be to either approach the SBDC or Beall directly and ask if introductions can be made. You should expect that the answer will be, why don't you show me your pitch deck? And you should expect to essentially to have to do a dry run, get some comments, and based on how you react to those comments, either you will or won't get introductions that you think you deserve.
Now, in a corporate partnership, who usually owns the IP? The bigger company or the smaller startup?
You know, that is completely a negotiation. The typical structure is, well, the typical small company that a big company wants to invest in is a small company that's going to be around tomorrow. So the big company really has no interest initially in watching the small company vaporize, because the technology is usually trickier than the small company might even realize, right? So the big company doesn't want to take it on until they're quite sure that they understand it. And so the big company is going to seek small companies that look like they have staying power, right? And that often requires the IP of the small company to stay with the small company, except as it's needed to exercise the rights that are needed to sell a particular product. So what I mean by that is, you remember the old mantra about patents is the right to make, use, and sell a product. So if you as a small company have some intellectual property and your big corporate partner wants to sell a product that uses that technology in the product, they at minimum need a license to that IP. And so the deal that is typically done, assuming the small company innovates and then the big company is actually going to sell this product, is a licensing of the small company's IP to the big company, essentially for the purpose, and only for the purpose, preferably, for selling this particular product. So it's common, the common structure is everybody keeps their own IP, and then something is done with the IP that's created after the relationship is created. And that is a complete arm wrestle. And often the small company needs to think how much they need rights to that IP to produce products that maybe the partnership is not imagining yet. So it's a real strategic decision by the small company on how to proceed on that. Karen is back.
Great. So now one of the questions our attendees had, can you please define a seed portfolio company in this context?
Yeah, I think the diagram was for a equity investment, a seed portfolio for a venture capital firm. And typically, you know, the size of deals that a VC firm will want to invest in will depend on how big the fund is. So if you see a VC firm that raises $1 billion for their fund, and that there will be press releases on that, then you can expect that that $1 billion will not be invested into 10,000, right? Whatever the, 10,000 deals. It's going to be in 20, 40, maybe 50 deals, but they're going to be big deals to spend that $1 billion. In contrast, if you see a $100 million fund, then that starts indicating that that fund might be dedicated towards early stage deals, seed type deals. And those, again, the fund and the firm, the VC firm, will want to invest enough that just by odds, they have a good chance of winning, so they can provide a good return to their investors. And so the deals, there will be usually at least 10 or 20 deals, but usually not 40 or 50, right? So it'll be someplace in there. And then the deal sizes will be, a baby deal might be a couple $1 million, $1, $2 million, up to maybe $5 million or so.
Great. Now, I know the SBDC offers a lot of services, and so now you spoke a little bit about grants and getting funding through grants. Now, can the SBDC help companies with their federal grant writing? And if so, to what capacity? Do you guys write from scratch? Do you develop a pitch deck? Can you just speak a little bit about the services that the SBDC can provide?
Sure. So what I like to say is we advise, but we don't do. That's the general answer. So we will not write, we will not submit, but we will help you with both of those things. So how can we help? Well, first of all, the SBIR program is designed for small businesses, and all of the agencies make it as simple as they possibly can for you as a small business with good ideas to submit a proposal. They make it easy. So a typical SBIR will require someplace between 6 and 10 pages of writing. That's your technical research document that provides some background and provides some understanding of what your technology is, as well as what you intend to do with money that you're requesting. And then some supporting documentation like your bio sketches and things that are just pretty accessible for you to put together. So it, it is a lot of work. I won't say it's not. There are people you can hire to do this, but be careful in hiring people, first of all, because it's quite a bit of money to hire somebody to write a good proposal. And secondly, remember I said these are technical documents. You're going to need to either find somebody who's technically knowledgeable in your particular area, and then get them up to speed on what your innovation actually is. or you're going to have to spend all your time actually writing the darn thing anyways. So I actually really encourage you. I think it's a good exercise, both as an exercise as well in reality, to put together the project plan. It's not an onerous amount of work. And although the initial funding is 10 to 20%, if you get rejected, and I will just say, remember, 80 to 90% of you will likely get rejected first time around. The second time, with feedback from the technical reviewers, you have a much higher chance of getting funded that second time around. So do resubmit. Karen?
Great. Now, in this current challenging environment, what is your opinion in regarding getting SBIRs or other non-dilutive funding? Is it still important now, or should companies just try to get any funding they can as they're in survival mode?
Yeah, and that's interesting, because I think if you are a tech-strong company, I always encourage you to look to SBIR and STTR awards, because I do think that they create a kind of technical seal of approval that investors will pay attention to. It also gives you money to hire some people that have some of the expertise that both the corporate partners and the investors are looking for. So I am a fan of those. I would say in this current environment, it's important to reassess every aspect of your business. And if you're not thinking about how COVID-19 is going to impact your customers, you really need to do that. And especially if there's even a glimmer that your technology might help people who are in the post-COVID world as you imagine it, then this is the time to start developing those ideas. And again, there is some money set aside in the federal agencies for COVID-specific ideas. So there's been additions of money on top of what's already there for COVID-specific purposes. And that is everybody from DOD to NSF, NIH, and all the other agencies.
Great, thank you so much. Now, that was the end of our questions. Any last remarks that you'd like to share with our audience today before we wrap up this webinar?
Well, I just hope, you know, all of the SBDC consultants are working from home and helping you out, whether it is finding, you know, PPP and EIDL loans for you based on COVID, to helping you create new ideas for your company in this post-COVID world, to helping you put together proposals and submit them to the federal agencies. The SBDC, the funding, I think, or sorry, the advising is free to you, right? It's paid for by our tax dollars. And so I encourage you to reach out to us, SBDC, I can't remember what our website is, sbdctech.org. Reach out to us and fill in the things saying, I'm new, I'd really like to have a counselor to talk with. We've got several that are very experienced in the biotech sector, as well as those, if there are any of you who are not biotech, we've got a bunch of folks covering all different types of industries. So please reach out and contact us, and I hope to actually see some of you at the Cove within sometime soon. And not too soon, but sometime soon. So with that, Karen, and you too, Karen, I do want to say for those of you who who have biotech companies but do not yet have homes, oh my gosh, go visit ULP. It's awesome. And Karen, you can speak a little bit whether you're open now and how things are working, but it is really fantastic space. I'm so delighted it's on the 3rd floor of the same building the Cove is in. So it's super convenient, but it's really, really nice space. So think about it.
Thank you so much, Molly, and thank you for taking the time to share your insight with our audience and our community today.